Okay, we're live. We're broadcasting live on the internet, and I'm talking to Councillor Alison Hernandez. Alison, you can speak if you want.
Hello.
Everybody can hear you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Alison is a councillor at Torbay. Is it borough or district council?
It's a unitary, but it's the traditional term is borough, but we're a unitary council.
You're a unitary, one of those weird councils.
One of those. Haven't got much money ones, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, and I'm talking to Councillor David Allan, who is the ward councillor for Frimley Green, which is part of Surrey Heath Borough Council. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Deach, and we're doing this Google Live Hangout as part of Our Day. Now, I'm not going to explain fully what Our Day is, but it's a local government initiative, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alison? Yeah. Local government initiative to give councils the opportunity to highlight the services that they do and the great work that they do in our communities. Now, we're going to do this from the councillor perspective because it's normally the sort of officers of the council that are doing these Our Day things. We're going to do this from the councillor's perspective, as that all three of us are councillors. And what I wanted to talk about today was the pros and cons, really, of being a councillor, because I don't know about you, Alison, but Dave and I are in our first term as councillors.
So am I.
You are too. We're up for re-election in May 2015, which is at the same time as the general election. I think it's going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And I've got to say that for me, and I'm pretty sure the same for Dave, becoming a councillor was actually a baptism of fire. I thought I had a clue how things worked, but actually I had no clue whatsoever. And to be honest with you, and this is no disrespect to the council or other councillors for that matter, but there was very little support available to me as a councillor to be able to cope with all the things that are thrown at you. So we'll start with Alison as the main guest for this. And if you could tell us about your first term as a councillor and some of the things that you weren't prepared for, let's say.
Well, do you know, it's because I used to be, I'm one of these people who've come from the other side, so I used to be an officer in the council. I've been an officer in local government for a number of years, and I decided I would become a councillor to remove the excuse that everybody used to give me within local government about why something couldn't be done. And when I became one, it was almost like a secret world. You wouldn't know what a councillor really does until you are one. And that's what I think is the really, really challenging thing, is that no matter, I thought I knew what councillors did, and I thought it was actually quite, in fact, very little. And then when you become a councillor and you see the types of things that you have to do, firstly to get elected, and then secondly to do your job once you are, it's something that you wouldn't believe. You wouldn't believe. And I would say a lot of people still think that councillors don't do very much. But it's not about meetings of the council that is the time-consuming or even really that challenging thing. It's the interaction with the people that you're there to represent.
I would agree with that.
And building the relationships up with the people to achieve really good things. So it's quite time-consuming.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point about the perception that people have that councillors do very little. And don't get me wrong, there are councillors, and it's no different to any other walk of life or professional environment. There are councillors that do very little. In fact, I know some that if they did nothing at all, it'd be more than what they'd want to do.
No comment.
Very true.
But there are those, and I would say they are in the minority. In my experience, the councillors that I know, most of which are very hardworking, and although may not have the same kind of social media profile that us three enjoy, they still work very, very hard for their communities. They're at every meeting going. They respond to their emails in a timely manner and all the rest of it. But it's interesting because what you say is quite right. There is that perception that councillors do very little. It's a bit like the same perception that all MPs have their nose in the trough.
Yeah.
You know, it's that same kind of attitude. And actually, if they really knew what we do and the amount of time commitment that we all give, I think they might think twice. And I suppose
it's interesting that you mention about the MPs nosing the trough thing with expenses, because I made a conscious choice when I got elected not to claim any expenses other than my basic allowance.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah, so all of us are.
Yeah, I mean, and it's quite interesting because I've had people say, you look like you're not doing anything because you don't claim any expenses, whereas other councillors do. And you're like, oh, actually, yes, for some people that would look like I'm probably not going anywhere or doing anything or participating.
Yeah.
And other people say, oh, no, it's great that you don't claim above and beyond your allowance because that's what your allowance is for. So,
well, interestingly, I don't know about you guys, but I actually didn't know until I got elected that I got an allowance.
It was. Yeah, I didn't either. I mean, I remember, Paul, when we found out. That was amazing. I was like, "What? You get paid?"
It was only
not very much, but you know.
It was only when I got an email from from someone from payroll at the council to say, "Can I have your bank account details please?" And I'm like, "Well, why do you want my bank account details?" "Well, so we can pay you."
Yeah.
You know, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Which is very...
out of interest, Paul and David, what allowances do you get for your basic being a ward councillor? What? Because I get. It's £7,900 thereabouts for an allowance for the basic in Torbay. What is it in your area? Because they're all different. All councils set it differently.
Dave, what's ours?
We get the after tax is like £400 per month. So that would stack up to about £5,000 a year.
Right.
Total, and then you get a little bit more if you're on.
What tax bracket you're on, David?
That's true.
Absolutely. Obviously earning too much money. You're giving it away there, Dave. You also get an extra responsibility allowance if you say the chairman or vice chairman of a committee, which I am.
Yeah.
And
me too. Yeah, you get a little bit more.
I'm a vice chairman of a scrutiny committee, which it gets me about an extra £1,000 a year.
Right. What's your basic, Paul?
I think it's actually about 6,000 a year.
Oh yes, it's all around the same amount then. Really, it's obviously between sort of maybe 5 and 8 across the country for just basic allowance.
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah, I would have said.
Okay, now David, what would you say? Because I want to cover the cons before we do the pros. Because I've got to say, now that I'm near the end of my first term, and hopefully I will be lucky enough to get elected into a second term. I will be seeking re-election.
Good.
Yeah, and I know you are too, Dave.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've got to say that there are definitely more pros than there are cons. But I think that anybody considering putting their head above the parapet and standing for council, or considering standing for council, should be aware of some of the cons. Because there are some, some that I wasn't quite prepared for, to be honest with you.
And not the Conservatives either. Cons.
Yeah, not that kind of con. Actually, before you answer, Dave, I just want to make it clear that when I announced that we were going to do this broadcast, I actually invited members of, because the three of us are Conservative councillors, but I did extend an invite to a Labour councillor as well, because I wanted it to be, but the trouble is because it's during the day and people are working and so on, it is actually quite difficult. So that's why there's only 3 Conservatives. But yeah, Dave, if you could perhaps talk us through some of your experiences.
Well, I think I didn't realize how well in the initial stages how much I wasn't really free to give my opinion about a whole bunch of things, because I got involved to be a councillor because of a local issue that happened here in Frimley, and then I said, they said, you need to stand for the council. So I went to the interview, and they said, oh great, we'll have you, and so I went to, and I got put in an area where it had been nothing but Lib Dems for 24 years. And the closest we'd ever come was losing by 350 votes. So and subsequently I started this blog called "Who Let the Yank In," because I was determined that was that was like the cast-off district. So they said, well, if you really must, then go over here. And then, to everybody's enormous surprise, I did get elected. But in order to do that, I had to knock on virtually every door. And I knocked on 1,687 doors, not that I was counting. But once I got elected, I didn't realize how much some of the officers would take what I had to say very personally, and be very deeply upset about it. So much so, and Paul knows this, within 90 days of being confirmed as a councillor, I was in front of the Standards Committee being disciplined for my interaction with a constituent, not one of my constituents, one in another part of the borough. And in fact, I got censured for that, and they demanded that I write an apology for that. And in true David fashion, I said, well, if you're going to do this, then I'm going to do that. And I took them to the High Court, and I won. So the foundation baseline case for what a councillor can and can't say, even to this day and going forward, is called David Allan versus Surrey Heath Borough Council. And needless to say, I won. But I think that it's caused some hard relations with some of the people. I mean, certainly I took it very, very personally when they took me to Standards. But, you know, I recovered from that just fine, and I work with most of those people today.
Okay, well, I don't want to go into the specifics of that particular case, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
But it does lead quite nicely onto one of the other cons, and Alison, I wonder if you've had any experience with this, because, to put it very bluntly, there are a lot of nutters out there.
Yeah. A lot of nutters out there.
There's a lot of nutters out there, and the thing is that, and I was going to say no disrespect to the nutters. Actually, yeah, it is disrespect to them, because some of these people, just for the pure reason that you're opposite party to what they are, will do everything they can to either upset you or try and
on a very personal basis too. You know? Yeah. So one of the things you don't understand when you're going into it as a councillor is that you're exposing yourself to an enormous amount of ridicule and people taking things completely out of context about your life, both the public and some of the officers and some of the people who work for the council.
But I think that So what I'm saying is that that's something I struggled with to begin with. I don't have any problem with it at all now, to be honest with you.
Me either.
I just let it go over my head.
Yeah, but I think that's part of that. One of the cons is that you do get thick skin.
Yeah.
That is actually the pureness and the softness of you before you become a councillor does get hardened up. I think
gone. Absolutely.
Part of the challenge, I think, of one of the cons is that I would say I feel less sensitive to things, which maybe that's a benefit. For me personally, I don't know. But
you do have to look at things sometimes with an open mind and try to understand that there are always there's another side to the story.
Yeah. But I do think it does challenge you to make sure that you listen, because when you get a thick skin, I mean, what I have found is that most of the people who may have shouted at me about an issue have a very valid issue, but people often haven't heard them because they're always shouting it or using inappropriate language to explain it and articulate it. So one of the things I would say is that you do get this thick skin, and you have to be aware of it, that you've got this thicker skin and that you can appear insensitive to people. Yeah. and not because you are insensitive. It's just how you've dealt with it, because you've had to deal with a barrage of people shouting at you in a public meeting or something like that. Because if you're really sensitive, it's quite hard to deal with. So I think the thick skin is a con.
But it can also be a pro.
As long as you're aware of it, you can deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's you've just inadvertently touched on another thing that I think people who are considering becoming a councillor should be aware of, because you can be thrown into situations that you're not expecting. So, for instance, believe it or not, you might find this hard to believe, particularly you, Alison, that I actually am not very comfortable doing public speaking.
No, I don't believe it.
No, it's true. I get nervous and all the rest of it. I've learned to deal with it. I've learned to deal with it. I'm a lot better at it than I used to be, but still, even now at council meetings and so on, I do get a few butterflies, but that's good nervous energy to have, I think. But locally, I was thrown into a situation quite early on in my first term, which if I'd asked 10 years ago, if I thought I was going to be thrown into that situation, I'd have run a mile. And that was to have to chair a public meeting with 600 people about a very hot topic, which was gypsy travellers.
Yeah.
Okay, and I had the Secretary of State sat next to me.
You were thrown in, weren't you?
And I was really thrown in, and I was terrified, to be honest with you. I lost sleep the night before.
Yeah.
As it happens, it went very well, and I've seen recordings of the meeting afterwards, and you wouldn't even tell that I was nervous.
Yeah.
But believe me, I was. And that's the other thing, is that as a councillor, you will be expected to speak in front of people, and you've got to be able to deal with that. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, very definitely. And so, for instance, I'm on planning, and even last Monday night, a week ago, we had a very, very volatile issue. And it's not unusual for 300, 400, 500 people to show up, because we got a pretty good sized gallery,
Well, we won't get that. We won't get that many people in our gallery, but we do for big planning applications. We
go to the theatre.
We'll use the theatre and
right. So you have to be, and particularly because they are very tightly controlled by our chairman in planning. And so you have to you learn to be very, very succinct in what it is you have to say.
That's what
not waffle about, just get right to the point.
Go on, Alison.
No, I was just saying Twitter teaches you to be concise and succinct, which is why...
Yes, it does.
why I like it so much. Okay,
well, we've covered a few of the sort of cons. Let's now talk about some of the pros, because... for me, anyway, before I was elected, I was heavily involved in the community for various different things anyway. And I almost, at a kind of unofficial level, was a representative of the community, through the residents' network and so on. So a kind of unofficial councillor, except I didn't go to council meetings and I didn't vote on things. But I did represent members of the community at various levels. One of the pros, I think, of being a councillor is that you can actually get things done. You have the ear of the officers and the leader, the chief executive of the council, to I suppose get their support to try and make something happen. And I can think, I'm not going to say what they are, because I don't want to be accused of using this as a how good am I kind of broadcast. But I can think of several occasions where, as a council, if I wasn't a councillor, I wouldn't have been able to achieve those things.
No, very definitely.
Alison, what's your experience, Alison?
I mean, definitely that. Particularly in your own ward, you can achieve. I mean, I've achieved most of the things without the council's help in my patch, just because it's easier to do it with others, which says quite a bit about how difficult it is to penetrate the council sometimes. But for me, one of the biggest pros of being a councillor is, oh God, I tell you what, if ever you're feeling down about yourself, you get to meet some of the most amazing people.
Yeah, you do.
That you wouldn't believe exist in your area when everyone's feeling a bit down about their area or down about something that's happened. You meet people who have got the most amazing persistence.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about those who just nag us councillors and lobby us to get a decision. I'm talking about people who are doing stuff within the community. As an example, we had a community group yesterday win the People's Millions, Lottery Millions.
Right.
They won just under 50k. It's a community centre called the Acorn Centre in Barton, which my daughter goes to in the school holidays. It's the best place ever. It's run by people who I've known since I was a kid. They're like the second mum in the community, and they got that money yesterday. She has worked, Marilyn Martin who does it, she's an incredible individual, and you get to spend time with, meet people like that actually makes you feel like, even when you've got your worst times and you're at your darkest moments, how inspirational people can be. And that, honestly, is the best bit about being a councillor.
Yeah, we've got...
If you weren't a councillor, people would think you were mad going and spending time with all these people.
Well,
you're allowed.
You're absolutely right. We in this community, and I'm sure it's no different to your community and any other community in the UK, is that it's ram-packed with just amazing people. And somebody once said to me a few years ago, actually, they said, "Oh, where's the community spirit? There's no community spirit anymore," and that is utter rubbish.
Yeah.
Utter rubbish. There's a lot of community spirit, but just because there are people out there that don't shout from the rooftops saying, "Look how good I am, look what I do," they do it selflessly, quietly, and without them, our communities wouldn't be the same places.
Yeah.
I really agree with that, and I also think that it's really important that if you are a local councillor, that you're representing the ward where you live. Not necessarily work, but where you live. So I represent Frimley Green. Paul represents Mitchett and Deepcut, and he lives in Mitchett. And I've been representing Frimley Green.
I live in Deepcut, actually, but yeah.
I mean Deepcut, I'm sorry. So this next time I'm going to be representing Frimley. And I mean, I'm kind of like, not as to the extent that Paul was, but I was already very involved in the Frimley community, very involved with things that happen here, the people here, and you know, you guys are absolutely right. You know, so for instance, our party often says there's no homeless, there's no difficult problems, people aren't poor, there's no soup kitchens required, and we have, because I'm Catholic and go to the Catholic Church, I'm very involved in St. Vincent de Paul, which is, and they have a fantastic guy here, John Luby, who comes to the aid of all kinds of people, and he and his wife Pat, you know,
real life angels, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, they hardly have any money themselves. I mean, and they are real life angels, and you know, that's the sort of people that for the most part you wouldn't meet. You know, there's a lot of ugly, nasty people out there, but there are some people who do some incredible things, and you know, you're right.
But even the ugly, nasty people, one thing we've got to remember as councillors is that we represent the people that didn't vote for us.
Yeah, exactly.
They have views as well, and they need representation and help sometimes. And the ugly, nasty people that you mention are the same, Dave. You know, they're
absolutely.
Most of the time, they're ugly and nasty for a reason.
Actually, as well, one of the things that I've taken a stance on since I've been a councillor is I don't represent people's views unless they are not confident enough to put their own views forward. But I will generally support them to put their own view forward, share their own view, you know, tell them how to do a petition, show them how to speak at a public meeting, encourage them to participate. And I don't like, because I've seen too many of it in the past, councillors representing the minority vocal view. Like in a ward on a planning issue because they think that's where the votes are. We've got something local going on at the moment that's very controversial, that looks very political with a big P, and you know, a lot of us are not happy about that because that is not what we were elected to do. And I think so. So I very much have not actually spoken on behalf of my residents in a lot of things. I often encourage the resident to speak on their own behalf. I really see is a weak councillor in some quarters.
Well, yeah, that said though, Alison, there are some people who, so Dave, for instance, is a typical brash Yankee. I'm sure you won't mind me saying that, Dave. Typical brash Yank. You know, some may even say a gobshite, but the thing is though, is that if you have an issue, Dave, you're quite perfectly capable of going out there, representing yourself and arguing your corner. There are residents out there that aren't as articulate as you, aren't as forceful or assertive as you are, and they do need somebody to help argue their corner. And I've had some experiences of that, particularly from a housing perspective or a benefits perspective. They just need somebody who can say, no, hang on a minute, there's something not right here, and make sure that they're getting what they're entitled to.
Yeah. But it's interesting, in my patch, we have a large retired population who I would say generally are quite vocal, are quite organised, and actually the people with the quietest voices are younger people and are working families.
Yeah.
People who work have the least, I would say, input into most of the decisions that go on because they're too busy to actually come to a meeting during the day that's been organised by the council, or even come to one at night because they've got childcare or caring responsibilities.
Well,
so the only time I've actually spoken up is when people are absent because they are unable to engage in the way in which our council is trying to engage with people.
No, totally. And actually, we're kind of verging into a con here, but that's another thing you need to be aware of as a councillor, is that if you're considering being a councillor, is the time commitment. Now, if you look at just our council, it's Surrey Heath Borough Council, for instance, I would like to see, not that I've got anything against old people, because I haven't. In fact, I love old people.
Hey, Paul, in fact, you're probably better most.
Yeah, but the thing is I would like to see more balance in our council chamber. More young people with children, because I think that there are community groups out there that are underrepresented, and that's not just young people, but ethnic minorities as well, disabled people, that type of young people in particular, I think are horribly underrepresented in our borough. But the problem is that to be a councillor, you do need to have a bit of time on your hands, and that's so. Of course, it does by default attract people who are retired or have got a bit of time on their hands. Yeah. That said, Alison, you and I are both young parents. I have an 8-year-old or nearly 8-year-old daughter. You've got some young children too. We do find that.
I've got an 8-year-old daughter too.
Right, and so we do find the time, and at borough level certainly, it tends to be evenings.
The way to find the time, and this is what I tell people about if they want to get engaged in some of this, is emails can be checked at 11 o'clock at night. Now, I'm not professing you shouldn't sleep. No. But I'm saying you can't tell me that between the hours of 10 o'clock at night and 12 o'clock at night, if you were really determined to make it work, you could set aside that time, even if it was once a week, to go through your council emails, to read some of your paperwork. Sunday evenings, read some of your paperwork. It can be done.
You've mentioned paperwork. This came in my post box today. And actually, this is quite a thin one. This is a Ziploc bag. There's actually a security lock on there, and these are all my council papers for the forthcoming week, minutes, agendas, that type of thing. Quite thin, this one. Sometimes, depending on which committees you're on, like planning, for instance, they can be very thick.
Yeah.
So there's some reading to do and all the rest of it. But interestingly, you do get to find out about things going on in the community that you wouldn't otherwise hear of. So that's another benefit.
Definitely.
Now we're going to wrap this up because I want to keep it to time, and we're 1 minute away from our half hour. But I just wanted to, Alison, if you could tell people your Twitter address, just in case they wanted to ask you any questions.
Yeah, so I am on, and this is a special, I've particularly not put councillor in my Twitter name because it's me, Alison Hernandez, you're talking to, and I have a day job as well, and I do other things, so it's at Alison Hernandez, ALISONHERNANDEZ.
And just out of interest, what do you do as your day job, Alison?
At the moment, I've got quite an interesting job. I've got a campaign manager job to get our member of parliament elected.
Oh, yeah, that's a great job.
To have a paid role doing that. So I am purely political this year. But
Right.
normally I'm a management consultant and go around the country and help businesses improve.
Right, fantastic. And I know you're very active in your community. You and I first met at Facebook headquarters in London for an event to help councillors become more digitally aware. And you were at that event too.
Audio Boo. You got me into Audio Boo, doing the audio interviews, because you showed me how simple it was to do on a phone.
Yeah.
And I've done tens and tens of interviews now on there.
I know, I follow you, and they're great. I wish I had your interview style. Excellent. Well, Alison, thank you so much for taking part in this, and I hope you will join us again in future ones.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Been great. Nice to meet you, Dave.
Okay, nice to meet you, Alison.
Hang on, we're not done yet. Dave Allan, thank you for taking part in this. What's your Twitter handle, Dave?
My Twitter handle is @FrimleyGreenman. So real simple. @FrimleyGreenman. So real simple to do, real simple to get a hold of me. I'm real public. If you go on there, you'll see website addresses, email addresses. So just go to @Greenman. You're there.
Okay. And what do you do out of interest for those who don't know, Dave?
3 or 4 things. One, I have a company.
Just tell us one of them.
I have social media expertise, a company called SM Expertise, and we do co-sourcing and outsourcing for people getting started on social media.
Wonderful. Well, I can tell people, hand on heart, you are an expert at social media. Very active on social media, so which is great to see, and it's great for local residents as well to have people who they can connect to so easily. I know you're very active on social media too, Alison. So
yeah, I get most of my casework now through social media rather than emails or phone calls.
Me too.
Really?
Yeah. The only downside of that is that I get other councillors' casework too, but
so do I.
but there you go.
There you go.
But both of you, thanks so much for taking part in this special hour-day Google Live Hangout, and hopefully we'll do many more of them. So thanks very much.
Cool.
Thanks, Paul. Bye, Dave.
Bye-bye.